Shawn Riegsecker. He is the CEO and founder of Centro, which supplies and automates digital media operations. Centro employs over 700 people, headquartered here or not here, I'm in Boston, but he's in Chicago, Illinois, here in the States.
Although we do have like 20 people in Boston, so
yes,
we make it there quite a bit.
Okay, and I saw that on your page too as well, that you have a Boston presence as well, so good to know. Shawn is also a founding director and co-chairman of Unite America, which is a new movement working on solving the partisan divide, which I think we all need in politics, through the election of independent moderate candidates. And one other thing before I turn it over to Shawn, one of the coolest things that I learned from my initial conversation with him is that he was a consultant for the Barack Obama campaign leading up to his first nomination. And then before his second, Centro was their digital extension for paid media, which I thought was really, really cool. And he shared a picture of himself and Barack Obama.
Most expensive picture I have ever paid for. That was a big donation to get a picture with the press.
Well worth it though. Well, since you brought it up, I was actually going to ask you offline, but can you tell me how expensive it was?
Yeah, it was the max. It was 30. It was that photo cost me, I think, 32,000 or 32,500. It was that was the price of it.
That is quite a donation.
It was. Wish I had that back right now, given COVID and the salary cuts we've gone through.
Yeah, right. So let's just start there. Talk to me a little bit about who you are. I think that motivated you to reach out to the Barack Obama campaign to want to contribute. Like I don't know anybody that does that or that did that, and certainly in a big way. Walk me through, your thought process there.
I'll connect it real quick back to just a little bit of childhood for whatever it's worth. And sure. I was born in Toledo Hospital, grew up on a farm for the first few years of my life, moved to a town of 200 people, and went to church 3 times a week. And so religion has always been very key and just a huge influence on my life. And somehow as a young child, I wanted to become a minister, and that morphed itself more into politics and social movements and really just trying to figure out a way to improve the world. And I don't know, at a super young age, there was this sense that the polarization and the dichotomy between a conservative and a liberal and a lot of these confounding views that came into my life. And so very young, I just said, we need a third party and we need to stop with this rhetoric. And so my first time voting, I voted for Ross Perot the first time. I voted for Ross Perot the second time. And it was always felt to me like I was choosing between the lesser of 2 candidates that I didn't really care for. And Barack, if I would go back, I loved Perot and what he stood for. But Barack was that first time in my life where I just felt that he represented something different. And I believed very early on that this is what we needed. And I've always found him to be rational, pragmatic, centrist, a thoughtful individual. And so back in late 2007, I just raised my hand. I reached out to the campaign and I said, hey, this is who I am. I understand marketing. I understand digital media. And I didn't reach out on behalf of business. I just reached out as a person. And I said, how can I help? And that was how I got introduced to the campaign.
Who was there somebody in your life early on growing up that influenced your, I guess, desire or almost an innate want to help people and to be more active? Because you talk about your childhood, all I was thinking about was, playing basketball and, just had such a myopic view of the world. Where did that come from?
I would say my mom's dad, my granddad, who at one point was a minister, was the guy that I always said, when I grow up, I want to have that level of character, integrity, values, principles, and all of that. But I would actually say that just believing in Jesus and the way that he lived his life and changed the world just had a big impact on me, and trying to send a message of love, send a message of acceptance, send a message of non-hatred, turning the other cheek. I mean, all of those things went together. And I think that just influenced me looking at the world and saying, why do we have such hatred? Why do we have such strife? Why aren't we taking care of people? And I think just as I got older, that just morphed for me into a much more politically minded than a religious mind.
When you say, why do we have so much hatred? Did you experience others, who were negatively impacted, I guess, by that? And were they groups of people? Tell me a little bit about that, and then and what role,
Yeah.
and how did you react, I guess, when you did see it?
So I always say that when I talk about my childhood, and even when I talk to kids and about overcoming obstacles in their life, I go, you got to recognize that as a child, first of all, I was the youngest kid in the class. I was the smallest kid, and that means that all the girls were bigger than I was. And, and disappointed because I wrestled in junior high, and I weighed 72 pounds in 7th grade, and I weighed 78 pounds. The lowest weight class was 82 pounds. That's how little I was. And so I was just a prime target for bullying. I got picked on, and I always go, look, every kid has a thing they can hang their hat on. I didn't have anything. I wasn't smart. I wasn't cool. I wasn't good looking. I didn't have money. I didn't come from a prestigious family. And so I think through that, I just felt the brunt of a lot of just every day there was a level of fear, going into school and what was going to happen on the playground that day. So I think that just molded me as, why do we have this? Why are kids so mean, and things along those lines? And then I'd say the other thing that, as it happened, as I got late in college, or late in high school, early into college, my hero, one of my heroes was my uncle. And my uncle was, I grew up in a very religious farm community. Nobody really left. Everybody worked in factories for the most part. My uncle was this good looking, cool dude, went skiing, traveled the world, lived in big cities. And I was just like, man, like, I want to have that guy's life. And then as I got older, my uncle contracted HIV, and nobody knew that my uncle was gay. And so it was at that time where it really forced me to challenge a lot of the things you grow up in, which is homosexuality is bad, or this person's bad. And I'm like, there's just no way that I can hate my uncle, who I love to death. And my heart was broken in the sense that, how could we live in a world where my uncle, who's one of the nicest guys, can't walk down the street holding the hand of someone that he loves? And so it was a schism in my life of just really evaluating my belief systems and helping me, I think, on a journey just to have a lot more understanding and empathy for what others are going through.
Did that challenge your belief system at all? I know you said that nobody knew that he was gay. In other words, obviously everybody knows now that you don't need to be, just not gay people get HIV, but back then that was the perception, obviously. Did you wrestle with your belief system, or immediately when you heard that he was gay, you said, okay, well, I'm going to accept him the way I was accepting him before I knew that? Or was it something that you wrestled with?
No, it wasn't that I was wrestling so much with my relationship to how I felt about it, as much as it was me wrestling with what I was believing, that there was a teaching going on in the church and or the organization relative to the acceptance of homosexuality, the acceptance of, anyone in the LGBTQIA community, and how that necessarily didn't align with what the scripture, with what I actually understood the scripture to be, which was that it was not my place to judge. And so for me, that just allowed me to more challenge the structure of religion, and because I don't think I had a personal struggle with it. I think innately, right? I think innately we know what's right and what's wrong. And then the question is, how much are we willing to accept that and or challenge organizations or institutions that may tell us or signal to us something different?
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned that, he was a guy that you looked up to, and man, you wanted to be him when you grew up, essentially, right? What did you want to be when you grew
up? Well, here's the thing. I came up with this theory back in high school. I remember I was working in the car with my dad, and I told it to him, and I can remember he was laughing about it. But growing up as a kid without any money, with nothing to hang my hat on, I believed 5 things, if I can even remember what they were. But I said power, or I said money leads to power. Power leads to respect. When you have power and respect, people will listen to you and they will emulate you or want to emulate you. And when you have those things come together, you can change people's hearts and minds. And so my passion has actually always been government and politics. And someday I would love to take a step in that direction. But I'm like, we got too many lawyers. I don't want to go to law school. We need more practical business people. And so I set a goal to start my own company by the time I was 30 years old. And the goal was to create a level of wealth where I didn't have to work and I could dedicate the rest of my life to public service. And so I ended up starting Centro at 29.
And did you know that you wanted to start your company by 30? Did you know how you wanted to, I guess, help people? In other words, what function that company would be, what sort of industry, or was it just something that you were going to start a company by 30 and it just happened to be Centro?
It was more, I wanted to go into music and theater. I grew up acting, I grew up singing, I grew up in music, and I wanted to go into music and theater, probably Broadway. And my parents, probably rightfully so, discouraged that for a lot of different reasons. And so I chose advertising. And the only reason I chose advertising was I liked commercials. It was the closest thing I could get to the arts in a business setting. And that's why I chose advertising. And then listen, this was just a stroke of timing and luck that the internet happened to arrive pretty much as I was graduating college. And so I saw the internet. I felt it was going to revolutionize, transform everything. So I graduated in 94. I started in the internet in 1996, started putting newspapers on the web. And so I don't know if the internet hadn't arisen, if I could have had that opportunity that I did to start something, because I felt like I was in on the ground floor.
Right. And you mentioned money, respect, and power. With that, when you built your company and started making the money, and I guess even now, just fast forward, and when you and I were talking offline about all that's going on, I mean, I feel like there's, and by the way, just candidly, guys, I'm realizing that because I'm falling back into my default, which is the interviewer, and I'm asking questions. Shawn and I agreed before we came on that we'd make this more of a back and forth discussion, Shawn. So feel free to flip the script at any moment. But I tend to just to dive right into this role, and that's primarily just because of curiosity more than anything. But when you started making the income, let's say, for instance, that you wanted to make, where you're at a point where you can donate over $32,000 for a picture with Barack Obama for something that you believe in. Was what your perception of what the money could do for you vis-a-vis the world? Did that change at all? Did you have challenges with that? Did you realize? Did you get to a point where I guess you felt like there was more that you could do? Or what? Walk me through that. What did that feel like when you first got to that point where you could start really having that money and respect that you needed in order to make change?
Well, I'd also say that this is a little bit of a story of entrepreneurship, and I think it's also a misconception a lot of times. In fact, I joke that I probably could have made more money in my career by working for someone else, because as an entrepreneur, you take a less salary than you could probably make somewhere else. You struggle really early on. And so look, on paper, sure. I mean, yeah, I'm worth a lot of money, but it hasn't materialized into being able to, live the life of a mogul by any stretch of the imagination. So now that being said, I've always said that, I will die broke because the goal was never, money as its own idol is meaningless. It's empty. It's actually more depressing. In fact, one of the best lines I've ever heard was this: money is an amplifier. That's really what it is. If you are a really good person, money will just help you become a much bigger good person. And if you're an asshole, money's just going to make you a bigger asshole. And I think there's a lot of truth to that statement. And so for me, it's always been, money is not the goal. Wealth is not the goal. It's how can I positively impact my world, my community, people. And because I'm a big believer in Stephen Covey and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which in one of the principles are that you have to begin your life with the end in mind, and you work backwards from that to the point that you actually write your own epitaph as you go through the work. And it's at your funeral when you've got 4 people that stand up and are going to talk about you. What are they going to say? And I just think, part of the meaning of life is that there's a calling that says, when I die, how can people say the world is a better place because Shawn walked on this earth? What is that going to look like? And think about if we all adopted that belief that our primary purpose is to improve the plight or the world we live in today. That to me is it. I mean, I just want to, at the end of my life, people say this place is better off.
You and I, as I alluded to, we're talking about in the wake of the George Floyd killing, just how I was feeling and how it relates to certain socioeconomical struggles that might not even have to do with color per se, how businesses, the role of business and the role of leaders in all of this. Once you've gotten to that, to the point where you've got your company right now, over 700 employees, certainly a lot of influence, right? What have you seen, or what have you been able to add to give back, I guess, if you will, that you're really proud of? And then what are some of the things that you're still struggling with that you want to get better at and contribute as it pertains to more diversity, equality, and inclusion?
Yeah, I'd love to almost kind of pivot the conversation, and
Sure.
and I was so excited to have this conversation with you today, and I've got some thoughts and or questions that I want to get your perspective on. But let's kind of roll it back a couple of weeks, okay? And really where you and I picked up. So let me start with, look, the culture and creating happiness for anybody who chooses to spend time in their life or career working for me is critically important. I want to be happy. I want my team to be happy. That's more important than anything else. And I'm not even sure if you know this, but Centro is known for our culture. We've been rated 4 years in a row the #1 company in the city of Chicago to work for by Cranes, by Chicago Business. We have been #1 in the advertising and marketing industry. And so we get a lot of reviews about that. My biggest failure, okay, as a leader, and failure relative to how I've pictured and viewed my company, is the lack of diversity that we have. And that's what I want to talk to you about in companies you work with and things that you can do and advice that you have. And so we've tried things, okay? And last year we kicked off a big DEI in a lot of earnestness to it. And so when I look at culture and I think about how much I failed in that area, I actually have no idea where I was going with that. But to me,
Well,
this is a little bit about just, the George Floyd stuff. So
yeah.
look, we've had protests, we've had movements, we've had things happen before. Something energetically, man, feels different about this time. And, the social, the protests, different things people are doing, it's great, but we can't lose this moment. And so to me, this is about what are we going to do to have a positive impact so we can get over this eternal strife and eternal struggle that we're dealing with. And then it comes to me and says, how can I use the position, the platform that I have to enact positive change across the board? And then there's a lot of questions that sit behind it. And so for me, I'll give you just some quick examples. We kicked off a DEI program last year, and we did great from a company relative to increasing all of the new people that we bring into the organization of people of color and or minorities. The problem is that I lost as many as I brought in. So my ratios didn't change. To this day, I still have that, and I don't, off the top of my head, it's like 82, 83% are white. It's like 5 or 6% Asian. I think maybe 3, 4% Hispanic and 2% Black. Okay, that's unacceptable data from my perspective. And then when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm going to focus on 2 pieces because people try to lump them together. But you can have a diverse organization that's not inclusive. or you can have an inclusive organization that's not diverse. If you look at my company, you would absolutely say we feel inclusive, okay? But we're only inclusive to the people that walk like us, talk like us, look like us, okay? So we actually aren't inclusive from a diversity perspective. So we're actually failing on, one, just being diverse. And then two, there's something wrong with my company that when someone of color is hired, they don't feel included, they don't feel welcome. And then there's the two downstream effects on that, which I'm really paying attention to. The one is, if you join a company and you don't feel a part of a team, okay, your performance is just going to suffer. You just don't feel included, right? And then the second thing is there's something about my culture where we judge or we evaluate someone who doesn't look like us differently because maybe they talk different, maybe they do things differently, or maybe we just don't feel that intimacy with them. And that could lead to either, you know, them deciding to leave on their own or them being unfairly judged for performance. So all of those things, we've got to just take a strong look at and figure out what's wrong with our company and why don't we get there? And then I'd love to really hear from you because we're dialing up, man, like threefold from where we were last year about getting serious about it. And so I want to know, in your position as a recruiter and someone who helps companies find people, and specifically in sales and specifically in technology sales, who are the how often, first of all, do executives come to you and say, hey, Jay, I've got this position and I really, really want a person of color or I want a female. Does that happen a lot? And if so, are there examples of executives that you've seen employ this and do it really, really well? And what could I learn from experiences you've had and the position you sit in?
Well, one of the things for sure is that I'd say certainly over the last 5 years, maybe plus, the request for women certainly comes up a lot more than the request for diversity or people with color, for sure. Right. We were talking about that a little bit earlier, but now that I think about it, it's definitely more has leaned towards women to diversify for a couple of, first and foremost, because a lot of software technology salespeople are men. A lot of the software technology salespeople are white, specifically as I recruit for a lot of the companies out of the Boston area. But I would say that over the last couple of years, I'd say more time than before. And perhaps maybe I'm just noticing it more, but people are looking for more diversity, whether that be color or women. And so one of the things that I believe, a couple of things, right? Strategically, if they care about these things, they're probably doing them already, right? Like targeting and recruiting folks out of historically Black colleges and universities. Going to, anecdotally, frankly, going to colleges and recruiting out of colleges that are more typically diverse, right? Like I went to Stonehill College. Often one of the monikers is Saint One Hill. And there's just this homogeneous culture there where I grew up. For everybody that knows me on Facebook, in a white community, you and I just became friends on Facebook. Go through my friends, you'll see certainly a lot more white than Black. Stonehill was predominantly white. So you wouldn't necessarily go there to find a diverse set of candidates and applicants. I think that said, beyond just campus recruiting, I think there's a bigger challenge, which is that if someone's coming to me specifically and asking me to help them find an enterprise sales leader or a sales executive, oftentimes they have to have a very specific set of experiences or they're not going to be considered. So right off up top, that's a really small pool that is shallow to begin with, right? And you're not going to find a lot of people, which is why they come to me, to find those people that are hard to find. Black, white, women, doesn't matter, wherever. Now, if you're going to shrink that down and say we only want women or only want people of color, then it becomes even smaller. Challenge with that, though, is that if those people aren't given the opportunity right out of college to join a Centro or to join any of my clients early on, then they don't get that experience where 10 or 15 years down the road, they can go and do that. Challenge with that is that if you are from, I'll say an economically impoverished community, perhaps maybe you grew up in a household that, it's a single parent, often the mother, there's a lack, there's this gap, right, of information in terms of where to turn, not just frankly economically, but then just also sometimes between right and wrong and what you actually see in your own neighborhood and who you're influenced by has profound effect later on. So you're down this path now that doesn't even, you can't even see an option to go to college, right, or to choose some sort of a university, and then you choose someplace else. And by the way, that someplace else that I'm alluding to doesn't necessarily have to be, to deal drugs or do something crime ridden, but it could just be that you're going to a retail store and you're going to work down the street after you graduated college, right? You're going to go to work at some sort of cellular store. You're going to work at a fast food restaurant and things like that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The challenge, though, is that if you're an employer of one of my clients and companies, you're not actively looking for them because they don't have a degree, because you're requiring a 4-year degree, right? And yes, education is important, but I think what's also important is allowing people and giving them the opportunity to reach up and to get opportunities through other means besides a 4-year degree. And then I think that way is one way where you can certainly diversify your employees and your company more by not just looking in colleges and universities. But I think it has to be a mindset from business leaders to say, we're going to start accepting people that don't have 4-year degrees, right? Across the board, whether it's black, white, or indifferent.
Yeah, this is something in which we spend a lot of time talking about, right? And as a leader, I get a lot of criticism. And I think there's two things that happen on this. And the one is, Shawn, I don't see people of color, specifically black, in management positions. I don't see, we've got one person of color on the executive team. We got one person of color on the board of directors, okay? I don't see you doing that. Now, so my one question for you is, how do we address that? Because there is a belief that there's just a shallow pool at the 10, 15, 20-year experience cycle. So we start there. The second thing connected to that I think from an inclusive problem or retention problem is this. I come into Centro, I do not see myself reflected in management. And therefore, I can create the story that there is not an opportunity for career advancement at this company for people like me. So I got to get that fixed. But I'll come back to, and I don't know whether it was Bill Gates or Mark Benioff, but there's this quote that gets passed around a lot, and I think it's pertinent right now to the discussion. It says, entrepreneurs overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year, but they underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years. All right? You don't have a magic wand. I don't have a magic wand. We can't snap our fingers and change this in the next 2 quarters or the next year. But what are the steps and metrics we can put in that in 3 years, 5 years, and if we all collectively got serious about this, in 10 years, we could transform diversity in industries and in sectors. But it's going to have to start with where you were at, which is it's the best analogy I created, sports teams. What's the farm league? How are we reaching children in high school? The one thing that I've always talked about, and it's actually something I'm working on right now, which I won't publicize yet because I got a lot of work to do on it. I've had this belief, and this goes back to even pre-internet, that the problem we have a lot in inner city and underprivileged communities is that the people they see that look like them are successful. There are 3 things they do. They play basketball, they are in hip hop, or they sell drugs. Those are the images that are reinforced. So then the question becomes, how do we change that narrative? How do we create different or by the way, the worst is what they see on the news, right? Or on social media of how, people older than them are being treated. And so there is this reinforcement and compounding narrative that I think creates a victimhood mentality. But if the kids understood one thing, that given your socioeconomic status and given your minority status, if you apply yourself and do good enough, and we won't have time to discuss my feelings on the, police and incarceration and judicial system. All right. But say that you can find a way to keep yourself clean, right? College is virtually free for you if you get there. But that's things that kids don't see. They look at their life and they go, I can't afford college. I can't afford to go to school. The reality is, through grants and programs, okay, it's going to be virtually free for you. You just got to get there. And so there are things we've done at our company through an organization called One Goal, where we start with kids in junior year in high school, and we are with them until they start their sophomore year, getting them through the last 2 years, making sure they stay, on track, and then helping them get in and understand how to go to college. A lot of times their parents didn't go to college. So to me, we've got to be serious about the cultivation of younger kids in minority groups and in underprivileged communities across the board. And that to me is just a moral obligation I think we share.
Yeah, and to your point about the entrepreneurs overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10, I think that it's, did I say that right, by the way?
Yeah. Overestimating one, underestimating 10.
Is that you're not going to get to the 10 years of experience or 15 years of experience if you don't get to the 1 year of experience, right? Like I heard a quote from Will Smith not too long ago that said, I didn't set out to be, a great movie star, or he put it and used a building a wall metaphor. He said, if I wanted to build the greatest wall ever, I start with that one brick and I lay that one brick as perfectly as I can possibly lay a brick. And then I lay the second brick and I lay that brick as perfectly as I lay the second brick. And before you know it, you have this big, beautiful wall, right? And I think that that's the mentality I think that you have to have as business leaders now, because we can't wave a magic wand and you look at your 700 employees and realize that only 2% of them are Black, and or conversely 83% is white, and everything else is something. But 10 years from now, what can that look like if you start thinking about and giving that example that you just gave in terms of engaging kids in high school on up through college, where you're able to cultivate that. And I think you brought up an important point, which I think there's more of an information gap in a lot of ways than anything, where you just don't have you don't have like a North Star, so to speak. Let's just say, for instance, if you're coming home stressed anyways from school that might be underfunded, and that there are, forget about even just the images of what society might think that's all you can do. It's really about having someone in your life, which is why I'm so curious about mentors, and why I asked you about, did you have someone in your life that really helped you form your social thoughts and who you wanted to be? Because I feel like that those are things that are often just missing. I was talking about before when I grew up, as I alluded to multiple times, right, as a Black man in essentially white society, a white city, white world, the whole 9 yards. My family didn't really illuminate that, right? They didn't illuminate and say, hey, by the way, you're Black, just in case you noticed, and all your friends are white, and they're going to look at you differently, and you're not going to be able to do the same things that they're doing, right? To me, it wasn't a discussion about that. It was, in my mind, again, looking back as a child, albeit I wanted to be a professional athlete because that's just a love that I had early on, right? I still want to be a professional athlete.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. But it's just, my son wants to be a professional athlete. But the point is that that's what I love to do. However, I wasn't told that I couldn't start a business. I remember my mother used to watch these nighttime soap operas, right? Even daytime soap operas, right? And you saw these businessmen and wearing suits, and then they had these really big, nice houses and beautiful wives and the whole 9 yards. And I was like, oh, okay, like that's cool. Like, I think at one point I would love to have that for me, but the means for me is going to be through basketball. But I never actually thought for a second that I couldn't go into business. I just didn't want to work, right, for anybody, so to speak, right? And but I think the point is that if you think that way, like if you think that there aren't opportunities, either A, because you see the opportunities but you don't see them for you, speaking of inclusion, right, from a societal perspective, right, or you see the opportunities and you know or frankly you don't see the opportunities, right, and then there's a challenge. But I think that if people become what you tell them they are often, right? And that can happen on a micro level, being parenting. It can happen on a macro level, being society. And one of the roles that I feel like I need to play as a dad, and one of the things that really motivates me as an entrepreneur, I say more now than before, as I'm getting older, is to be that positive influence and to let my kids know, and to let other people that might, you know, see myself in them, know that, you know, there aren't any boundaries. Like, I'm certainly not I didn't go to my kids after George Floyd got killed and immediately started talking to them about, you know, the color of the skin and what might, you know, happen and all that stuff, right? And I'm going to be careful in case they happen to be watching this on Facebook with mommy right now. But right. But the thing is that there are so many things that happen in society that we don't illuminate, right? Happen at schools, happen in churches and those types of things. And I'm not going to go downstairs and sit my kids down and say, hey, this is a terrible thing, because I want them to look, when they look at themselves in the mirror, to know that whether they're looking at themselves or looking at me or they're looking at, you know, one of their friends, that they can become, first of all, what they love to do, right? I always say, find a job you love to do and you never have to work a day in your life.
My favorite.
Yeah, but something that they love, but then also that they're capable of doing anything. And I think to take that away from anybody, whether it's you know, your own child or just other kids in the community, you're just not really doing them a service. And I feel like that's one of the things that my mother did, you know, and that my family did at an early age, where they didn't point it out. It was just one of those things where I felt that I could get up and I could make something of myself regardless of my color.
So on that, so let me bring up two things and two phrases that are getting talked a lot about in the society today. Let me start first with white fragility, and then I want to talk about white privilege. Okay, so white fragility, the definition of white fragility is this, because you know, I tried to set the table with my whole company this week and running through a lot of things, and I brought this up. White fragility really means that white people do a really great job of creating barriers, and so they don't have to experience racism. They don't have to hear about it. They don't hear about it. They don't see it. It doesn't have any effect on them. And we just inoculate ourselves against that. And a lot of that has to also do with, we don't have Black friends, so we don't hear the stories. Or even if we do know Black people, Black colleagues, we actually aren't what I call in the workforce professionally intimate. Like we may work with them, we may know some things, but we don't really know what they go through. So that's white fragility. And then what that leads to, even if people, white folks, really want to help, and this is the thing people need to know, is that we're afraid. Okay, like I'm afraid to engage in a discussion on race. I'm afraid to engage in a discussion on discrimination or oppression because I actually don't want to mess it up. I don't know how to engage in it. I don't know how to talk. I don't know how to bring it up. And the other thing is, I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, right? You are, because we create our stories, right? You're already uncomfortable inside of my company. I don't want to make you more uncomfortable by pointing out and bringing up the fact that our skin color is different. Okay, so that's the fragility aspect. Now we move to white privilege, and there's this white privilege, white shame, white guilt that really is connected to this. And then if you're a lot of people on the conservative side are like, well, why should I feel guilty? I didn't have anything to do. I was born a white Protestant male. Okay, it's not my fault. Okay, and liberals are like, well, you should feel guilty or shame, and you need to work. Go outside of your comfort zone and work to correct that. Robert Blackwell Jr. is a guy who is a very successful Black man in Chicago, one of my coaches, mentors, and challenges. And I love the way he puts this for white folks. In general, he says, look, white people don't have privilege. He says a prince has privilege. And he goes, a prince can kill someone and nothing's going to happen to the prince. That's privilege. Because What white people just have is a lack of a disadvantage that a black person has. And I think that's more accurate to say it's not that we're all born into some form of privilege. We just don't, the mountain's just not as high for us. So for you, as you went out on your own, started your own company, and understanding that, you know, you grew up predominantly white community, you went to a school that's 82% white college, right? And in our other conversations, you've said that you haven't really experienced what we see a lot of the headlines in the news are. Did you have doubts in your head? Have you seen, what was your experience like as a black guy? Because I always say as a sales guy, okay, and starting Centro, I could walk into a conference room and I didn't have to overcome an obstacle because of the color of my skin and maybe my gender, right? And I also know how tall that mountain is to build a company and how hard it is. And I always say, I'm being honest, if you added another 100 feet to that mountain, given my skin color, I'm not convinced I'd be successful today. Okay, that's not to say it's not overcomable, but how do you feel about that? And what has your been experience? And did you have doubts? Did that even enter your mind, or was it just a non-issue for you?
It's interesting. So like I said, I've never felt the overt discrimination, and always have been comfortable in my own skin relatively, right? I say relatively because, you know, if I wanted to, say, date a girl with the opposite color and she was into another guy who had wavy hair and white skin, then it's like, oh, okay, maybe that's a reason, right? But that's really superficial. I think that when it comes to business, I'll give you a couple of things. So when I first got into this business as a headhunter, the president of the company that I was interviewing with, this is upon our first meeting, he said to me, you know, how are you going in this world? There's a lot of white people, right? A lot of white guys. And, you know, a lot of them are from Boston College and that type of thing. And he said, you know, when they see you walking in and, you know, there you are, obviously black, you know, what do you think? Like, they might not, I don't know how he put it, but the intonation there is that they might not like you, so to speak. Right. And how will you handle that? My answer to that without hesitation was, you know, I smiled and probably said something to the effect of, you know, I can handle it just fine because I grew up around white people my entire life, and I went to a college that was predominantly white, and I'll be fine, right? That's number one. And I was, and he hired me. The second part of that is I remember when I walked into an office who ended up being a really big account for me early on. This was actually during the first financial crisis, at least of my lifetime, professional life, in 2008. And I walked into it was a company right above us in the building on Federal Street in Boston. And I walked in there and I was holding something like some sort of tchotchke, if you will, like a little book. And I was wearing a suit and a tie, and the woman, by the way, who was the vice president of sales, asked, you know, she thought I was a Jehovah's Witness because I was walking in there wearing a suit and holding a little book. Right. Another time I walked into an office and I was waiting to meet with, you know, he was the CEO or maybe a vice president of something. And I was asked if I was the driver, which clearly I was not. And so those instances right there are, for me,
just out of curiosity, at that second,
yeah.
What do you feel? Like, just how do you feel at that second? Like when that happens to you?
I laughed. Comedy, you know. Yeah, because to me, it doesn't. Does it impede what I'm there to do? No, right. And as long as it didn't impede what I was there to do, didn't matter, right? This person, when they said it, did they have any ill intention? No, it was probably just a perception that they had, right? It was almost like a natural knee jerk. I'm laughing now if I think about it. It was sort of like a natural knee jerk reaction. Are you the driver? No, I'm not, right?
Out of curiosity, just what is that person when you're like, no, I'm here for business? I mean, how does the other person react? I mean, because if I did that, I'd be like, oh, shit, man. Oh, my God. Like, I would feel like an asshole for a week.
Maybe inside. Outside, they just played it cool, you know? They just played it cool. Like, it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, they would have said it to anybody, right? They happened to say it to me, but they said it, but they would have said it to anybody. I think that was the response. And frankly, I can't blame them. I think as it pertains to business interactions, and why I was grinning a little bit there when you asked me that question is that here's what I've always found fascinating about being in this skin and then being in this world is that I almost look at it like a bit of an advantage, if you will, because I heard Robert actually on the presentation that he gave, Robert Blackwell, talk about, he gave me the analogy of, there's 3 or 4 guys standing there on the basketball court. You got the white guy, the Asian guy, and the black guy. And, you need to pick your first team member, right? You're probably going to pick the black guy, right? Conversely, if you want to pick out who's the best person at math out of those 4, your black guy's probably going to be last, right?
Yeah, Asian guy's probably going to be first, right?
Asian guy's going to be first, right? I have my best friend in the world, one of the best basketball players I have ever met, certainly the best basketball player in high school. He was short, he was like 5'6", 5'7". He was white. And he'll clean clock on everybody, right? Jump higher than everybody, run faster than everybody. This is football, basketball, any sport that he wanted to play, he would just dominate. But if you look at him on the basketball court, he's going to be the last person picked, right? And that would be a big mistake, right? Same, I feel like for me in business as well, right? So if I walk into an initial business meeting, let's just say, I know just based on my general skin color, I don't care if it's over a meeting, over the computer, or if we're meeting in person. I say that I've never experienced it, and I haven't. But what I'm always aware of, and have always been aware of, even as a little kid going all the way back to kindergarten, first grade or whatever, is I'm very aware of the color of my skin and the difference in the skin color. That said, when I meet somebody in a business setting for the first time, I'm always thinking, and whether it's true or not, but I'm thinking that their perception of me is slightly lower than it would be if I were standing there in white skin, right? Which is perfectly fine with me, just like it was with my friend on the basketball court, right? Because on the basketball court, what you're going to do is you're not going to be in a defensive position. This defensive position you'll be in if you thought that he had game. So same thing with me, right? When I'm entering into a business discussion, the expectation is low, right? So to leave that meeting and inspire confidence in that person, right, where they walk away and they say, ooh, like he's the real deal. Oh, that's an impressive guy, right? Ooh, I want to work with him, right? I didn't expect that, right? So one of the things I learned out of college, and that company that I went to, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and I was there for 7.5 years, they always say under promise, over deliver, right? Just walking into my, just being who I am is an under promise, right? So it doesn't, it makes over delivering not that hard to do, especially when you care so much about it the way that I do, right? The way that I approach everything, right? I think my whole outlook on this is that I don't want to feed into a stereotype. One of the stereotypes out there about Black people in general is that we're always late, right? I'm the type of person where I'm never late. Like I'm always early, right? To the point where sometimes, I would sleep at the office at one point at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I would, even at my old company in recruiting, I would get to the office. One time I looked at the clock, it was 4:55 in the morning. I didn't have to be there until 8, but I was there anyways, right? So I'm that type of person that is going to, I've always wanted to defy what you might think of me, A, because personal pride, B, it's fun, really, and then C, it's just a matter of, I'm trying to, as much as possible, undo those negative stereotypes. And if they're going to give me a chance, I'm going to make sure that, I'm the chance that they took, that's going to be the reason why they continue to take more chances on people of color and so forth. And one other thing that I'll say too, by the way, and I'll give a shout out to the company, American Personnel. So when they hired me, they didn't have any people of color. There was actually no Black people. I was there for 4.5 years. I ended up helping them recruit, I think. So, and it was a smaller company, right? There was only, let's say on the floor, there was probably about maybe 12 to 15 recruiters. And at one point, like 6 of us were Black, right? And we called it African American Personnel, right? Because that's how
in the whole company,
yeah, right. Out of 15 recruit, which is great, right? And we sort of like jokingly, referred to it as African American personnel, and it felt really good. And to your point about inclusion, we felt like, okay, like we belong here, right? Like the person, even walking into the company, the first thing they saw was a Black woman standing there, sitting there at the desk, right? And then you come out back and you meet the recruiters and all that type of stuff. So it felt really good to do that. So that's sort of,
this is where there's this, and I think this is a lot of where we all, struggle, because we can vacillate on points of view, and there's nuance to the entire discussion. And relative to what you said, there's two things. The first, and you alluded to it earlier, and I do believe this, that people will grow into the size of the container or box that you put them in. So that's one, right? We know that happens with fish, right? You get a small fish tank, fish don't grow as big if you put them in a big fish tank, great. But the second piece is, I say this a lot, right? Happiness, first of all, is about managing your own expectations. And, customer service or how you're rated is a level of just managing the customer's expectations. Mm-hmm. So there, you could almost jujitsu, okay, and turn theoretically a negative into a strength, which is you say, look, I get the fact that my, skin tone is darker and therefore the expectation of me is less. So how can I, that if that is somewhat true or mostly true, how do I empower myself and actually use that to my advantage versus looking upon it as a weakness? Because the perception that we have, the stories that we tell ourselves, okay, affect our performance in our mind. And you could sit and say, oh, I'm a victim and this sucks and I got to go through. Or you could be like, you know what? This is actually a blessing. Like, this is actually going to help me more than it's going to hurt me. Any just feelings on that?
Well, I think, yeah, the first feeling is that it starts it has to start, and it's frustrating to say this, but it has to start at an early age, right? Those thoughts about self-worth and value have to almost be there from the beginning, especially to your metaphor about the mountain that needs to be climbed, right? Because we know that the mountain is so hard to climb to begin with. You have to have that, that internal strength or fortitude, if you will, that I call, even with my kids, right? I'm not necessarily overly concerned about their IQ. I'm worried about their EQ, right? And how they feel about themselves and how they're able to persevere and overcome obstacles and those types of things. And I can tell you that, going all the way back to when I was playing Little League, I remember people always say, why are you so confident? Why do you, and I think it goes back to then when I could hear, my mother used to wear these silver bracelets, like 3 or 4 on each arm. And she would come to all my Little League games when she could. She was a nurse. But she would come to all my Little League games. And when I was playing well, I could hear those, I could hear those bracelets clanging, right? And I said, okay, yep, I'm doing it. This is great. Like I was getting that sort of feedback, I guess, if you will, right? And she used to tell me you could do anything you put your mind to and those types of things. And I think those things really matter. I think absent of those, right, absent of that mentality, it becomes very difficult because especially now, right, when you and I were growing up, they had 3 or 4 channels, so to speak, maybe Fox 25 came in during our teen years and this, that, and the other thing. But now where there's so many mediums through which to find all these images and challenges and all this stuff that we have, it's very easy to just accept that and either get angry about it and do something that's not necessarily productive, or do something else that's not productive, which is to do nothing and just sit there and somehow be comfortable with the status quo and not want to get there,
So I want to bring up 2 things. And by the way, I know we're coming up on time, so you can shut me up if you want to, but I'm enjoying the conversation. And I think it's actually an important conversation. So a couple of things. First, I want to share, when I meet with inner city, underprivileged kids in high school, and we'll either bring them into our office, I'll go see them, and I talk about my life and things like that. And I give them 3 pieces of advice at the end of it. And my 3 pieces of advice are this. First of all, is that life isn't fair. And the sooner that you accept it and get over it, the more successful you are going to be. Because the reality for you guys, you will have every reason in the book to not be successful and to play a victim for the rest of your life. And you know what? No one will ever fault or blame you for that. So feel free to play the victim card forever, but I can promise you it's not going to help you. So that's number 1. Number 2, knowledge is power. And I didn't grow up smart. I didn't grow up in an intelligent household. I didn't get good grades. I didn't even go to good school. Okay. But I read more than anyone else. I studied more than anyone. And I knew that I was going to have to work 2 to 3 times as hard to get where I wanted to go in my own life. So take control of your education, because every piece of information and knowledge you need is in a book somewhere. You just got to go get it. And that's what I did. Okay. And then the third thing is this, that work ethic trumps intelligence or beats intelligence. And so you got to understand that I believe that I can be anything that I want, but I also recognize that I am not born with some God-given talent or intelligence or physical acumen that would allow me to be great. Okay. So that's, to me, a level of just acceptance and empowering and understanding the odds that you got to do. But then one question I want to ask, and it might be a sensitive subject, is this. I don't think people like to talk about. I posted something on Facebook, and I had a little bit to do just about my own instance of police brutality. And one of my really good longtime Black friends called me up, and we were engaging in a conversation about it. And he was just like, I'm so thankful, you put that out there. And then we were just getting into it, and we were talking about culture. And here was what he said. He said, and he kind of grew up a little bit like you, okay? It wasn't an impoverished, underprivileged community. And he goes to college, and he had a lot of Black friends, and they would be like, Keith, why do you talk white? Right? And he goes, I'm talking the King's English. Like, this is English, right? Like, he's like, why do you? And he's like, I had this feeling that people kept trying to pull me to a place, right, where they were, okay? And I just want to know, like, have you ever, culturally, as a very successful, powerful, executive in the industry, how do you bring people together on that? And have you ever experienced comments like that, and just any thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's probably the thing that I experienced mostly, well, honestly, it didn't probably start happening until maybe college, where I remember one it was a white person, not even Black, white person in particular, would say, like, you're not Black, you're white.
Right.
Like, you're not Black, you're white. Well, what do you mean? And it was basically, because I enunciated, right? I had a big vocabulary,
Right.
I wasn't, my pants weren't hanging down by many, who knows, like all this perception that, that white people have of Black people, she certainly had. And I think maybe even among my Black friends and peers in high school, certainly high school, because in college it was different because we all lived on the same campus, and nobody really knew where anybody came from, and we were all just trying to get there. Although I will say that most of my Black friends in college were on the basketball team, which is another stereotype, right? But I think in high school it was me feeling a little bit conscious about it in terms of among my Black friends, or maybe even like my cousins, or people who were from the inner city, where I didn't feel like I was like, they're gonna look at me different, right? Like, I'm not gonna be Black enough, right? Because of where I come from.
Right.
And we just sort of had a different approach, I'd say, to just the way that we communicated, right? And that was something that was just always different, but you know what? I don't think it has had much to do with where I grew up as it did just my family, right? In other words, like my mother, my father, my grandmother, my aunt, my uncle, my other aunt, everybody just spoke. I don't know. You said the Kings.
Well, the only reason I bring it up, because I can specifically remember in my life not coming from, and I've got the best, family in the world, and it just wasn't that type of a community, wasn't that type of a family. Big words, was not something we were known for. And I didn't know where the fork went. I didn't know how to deal with spoons. I couldn't discuss anything of high society. I didn't know how to dress. What were the right shoes? When I started out, I was like, I got to figure out how to exist in that. And I would buy those DVDs, because the internet really wasn't at the time. But I remember buying like DVDs. This is how you dress for a meeting. This is how you set a table. This is where the little spoon goes. And it's just, and I always look at that and think about that there is a level of just studying and understanding that we have to all put just a little bit of work, right, into and I don't want to call it assimilation, because I hate the idea, but there is a level of King's English, as my friend Keith said.
I think
it's just the way we.
Yeah, it's the other thing too, is just simply observing behavior. I mean, even now, since the beginning, when my kids started using forks, I always make sure I put the fork on the left side, just because I'm trying to let them know without even telling them that this is just where the forks go, right? Even though they're going to pick it up, or even though they're going to eat with their hands, right?
I think there's this level of just emulation and role models, and it's something that I think you were blessed in your life to have that. And I don't know percentages, but you probably aren't in the majority of folks. And I think there's a level of just how can we, give back? How can we put positive images out in the world and that kids can attach to and say, I can see myself like that individual. Okay. Like I'm going to emulate that person, versus, Jay-Z or, because look, the percentages of getting in the NBA, the percentages of getting in the NFL.
right.
Okay. You get a lot higher opportunity to become a lawyer, doctor, business person, whatever. But we got to just tell those stories, and we got to figure out how to do that in a bigger way.
I think that's it. And that's going back to what motivates me is that I feel like the bigger platform that I have and can create, the more useful I'll feel, right? Because I'm not a policy wonk. I'm not certainly not a politician by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not an organizer, I'm not a community, I'm not any of those things, right? That's something that I've just never been. I know what I am, what my strengths are and where I put my energy towards. And really it is about sort of business and process and orientation and those types of things. And I love, one of my greatest occupations in the world, or the thing I like best, is being a dad, and everything that it means to be that. And that also, again, maybe it is because I've become a dad, but it's like, okay, now I feel like I want to, there's got to be a way where I can be more of an influence and a mentor to other people, right? And I had mentioned to you about becoming a part of what's locally here is the Metco program, which are inner city kids, and sponsoring them is the best, in any way I can. But I think that I keep coming back to the lack of information and the lack of I don't want to say positive role models necessarily, but I think it is just because you don't know where to go. And frankly, for anybody who's, the listeners of my podcast have heard a lot of the sales leaders say that they like people that have growth mindsets, right? And part of that growth mindset is that involves reading and looking for information that isn't necessarily there, and it's not going to be spoon fed to you, but something that you have an inherent curiosity about, and you're not going to wait for somebody to show you. You're going to go out and learn. And I think that's what you were just alluding to in terms of being able to not assimilate, but just to sort of have that that mindset where, okay, I'm going to level up a bit and make
right.
and make myself stronger. And I think as business leaders, the role that we can play is to reach out. I don't even want to say reach down, but reach out to people and bring them into.
Well, I also think that it's one thing for me to talk. It's one thing, but as much as they may say my words matter and the advice that I give is good, they're just not there's a level of just, I'm not reflective of them. And I just fundamentally believe that kids, the more that they can see you, the more they can be attached to what you've done, that it's powerful, Jay, man. Like there's just a level of power that you probably don't even see, that you have to really helping. To the extent that I can work with you on it, man, to the extent that we can partner together, I'd love to keep this going.
Yeah, this is great. And guys, like I said at the beginning of this, it's I think it's just something that it was a naturally organic conversation that Shawn and I had when we first started talking about him coming on and doing the Over Quota podcast. But we certainly can't ignore the world either, and which is why I wanted to share this on Facebook Live now, and to share this with my audience, my podcast listeners, because I think all of this ties into, whether we like it or not, or whether we think so or not, it ties into business, and business into the community. And I think that as leaders, we have almost a responsibility to make sure that we're reflective of the communities that are supporting us and the people that we want to serve, right? And what I mean by we want to serve, in other words, their customers who may be in the communities that we're talking about here, and we want to help. And a rising tide raises all ships. We want to be the rising tide. So Shawn, I want
one real quick comment I just want to make in honor of today. All right, Juneteenth or June 19th is this. We at our company, this is now a forever and always holiday to honor and celebrate the official abolition or the abolition of slavery. Okay, but when I made it a holiday, there's two ways we can look at this. The one is people need our help and there's a level of charity, okay, involved in it. And frankly, we can donate and that's fantastic. Okay, don't get me wrong. But if we want to make a difference, it's got to happen at the economic level. Charity's not going to move the needle in 3, 5, 10 years. All right. What's going to move a needle is economic empowerment. So today, I would just ask, I've already done it. Find a Black business, find a Black entrepreneur, okay, or a minority. And rather than donate today, go buy something. Okay. That creates enterprise value for people. And so that's the thing I would just want to say is let's be proactive in actually, patronizing and working with Black-owned businesses and vendors.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Shawn. I commend you for that. That's just something that, if more leaders looked and took that approach, I think we'd all be better for it. And, the difference between donating and actually patronizing a business is vast. When you just look at even the mindset, right? In other words, you're empowering them. You talk about economic empowerment. You're empowering them. They feel good about working for something and having it exchanged for currency where they can go out and improve their lives or pay it forward and do better for the people in their community as well. So thank you for that.
Right, man. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, everybody. And don't forget, again, to rate, review, and subscribe. If you're listening on the podcast, I'm cueing the music. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.